Part 2. On the evening of Tuesday, April 11th, 1865, on the second floor balcony of the White House's north portico, President Lincoln delivered an address on the way forward. We meet this evening, not in sorrow, but in gladness of heart, the evacuation of Petersburg and Richmond, and the surrender of the principal insurgent army give hope of a righteous and speedy peace whose joyous expression cannot be restrained. Lincoln warned that the re-inauguration of the national authority, Reconstruction, would be fraught with great difficulty, but there was hope. Some 12,000 voters in the heretofore slave state of Louisiana, said the president, have sworn allegiance to the Union, assumed to be the rightful political power of the state, held elections, organized a state government, adopted a free state constitution, giving the benefit of public schools equally to black and white. What's more, the Louisiana legislature had the power to grant black men the right to vote. Lincoln hoped that the Bayou state would do that for some. Lincoln said that if he had his truthers, black suffrage would be limited to very intelligent black men and to black soldiers and veterans. Outside was a vast sea of faces, illuminated by the lights that burned in the festal array of the White House, and stretching far out into the misty darkness, reported the Sacramento Daily Union. It was a silent intent and perhaps surprised multitude. That is the last speech he ever made, muttered actor John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer. Booth was outraged over the possibility of any black man having the right to vote in Louisiana or anywhere else. A few days later, on Good Friday, Booth shot Lincoln in the head as the president sat with his wife and two guests in the presidential box at Ford's Theater. The play was Our American Cousin, an English farce. Lincoln died the following day at 7:22 a.m. At 10 a.m., his vice president, former slaveholder Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, was sworn in as a nation's 17th president. A native of North Carolina who moved to Tennessee as a young man, the combative, often crass Andrew Johnson had fiercely opposed Tennessee's secession. A U.S. senator at the time, he was the only Southern senator who had not resigned his seat when his state did, in fact, succeed. During the war, once Union forces virtually controlled Tennessee, Lincoln made Johnson military governor of the volunteer state. 2 years later, Johnson became his running mate in his bid for re-election on the nation's Union ticket. 2 weeks before the election of 1864, on the steps of the state capitol in Nashville, Governor Andrew Johnson addressed a pro-Union black rally, acknowledging that the Emancipation Proclamation had not declared free the people enslaved in Tennessee, as it wasn't under Confederate control. Johnson proclaimed freedom full, broad, and unconditional to every man in Tennessee. Johnson, born dirt poor, then went on a rant against Tennessee's white elite, a class he thoroughly despised. Let them gather their treasonable conclaves elsewhere, among their friends in the Confederacy. They shall not hold their conspiracies in Nashville. After he got that off his chest, Johnson plowed on, looking at his vast crowd of colored people and reflecting through what a storm of persecution and obloquy they are compelled to pass. I am almost induced to wish that, as in the days of old, as Moses might arise, who should lead them safely to their promised land of freedom and happiness. You are our Moses, people shouted. Johnson objected. God, no doubt, had prepared somewhere an instrument for the great work he designs to perform in behalf of this outraged people. And in due time, your leader will come forth. Your Moses will be revealed to you. We want no Moses but you. The crowd cried out. Johnson relented. Well, then, humble and unworthy as I am, if no other better shall be found, I will indeed be your Moses and lead you through the Red Sea of war and bondage to a fair future of liberty and peace. Would what would be to white Southerners who had risen up in rebellion against the Union. Shortly after Andrew Johnson became president, he told a delegation from Indiana that treason must be made odious and traitors must be punished and impoverished. The nation waited anxiously to see what exactly President Andrew Johnson would do. Chapter 4, Restored. To say the least, President Andrew Johnson did not turn out to be the Moses who would lead the freed men and women to their promised land of freedom and happiness. Although he became an opponent of slavery during the war, he would severely disappoint any hope that he would be a committed advocate for equal rights for the former slaves. Indeed, many historians have characterized him as a white supremacist. And when it came to those traitors, people who had fought tooth and nail to keep black people in bondage, people who had plunged the nation into a horrific civil war, well, Johnson changed his tune. Politicians pressed him to keep the rebel states under military rule for months or years, but Johnson would have none of that. On May 29th, 1865, with Congress not in session, Johnson issued two proclamations that made radical Republicans erupt in protest. First came Proclamation 134, granting amnesty to participants in the rebellion, with certain exceptions. It declared that most of the people who participated in the rebellion would not be charged with treason if they simply swore an oath of allegiance to the United States. Exceptions included high-ranking Confederate officials and rebels with a taxable real estate valued at $20,000 and more. They had to appeal directly to the president for pardons. Though Johnson's sympathies were with poor and middling white folks, he would soon pardon a whole lot of $20,000 men. Next came Proclamation 135, reorganizing a constitutional government in North Carolina. Having tapped Democrat William Holden to be North Carolina's provisional governor, the president instructed him to hold a state constitutional convention with delegates chosen by people loyal to the United States. There were only two things North Carolina had to do to be right with the Union: rescind its ordinance of secession and ratify the 13th Amendment. This was Johnson's blueprint for reunion across the South. President Johnson bristled at the word Reconstruction. On the day he issued his first proclamations, he told John Blackjack Logan, General, there is no such thing as Reconstruction. These states have not gone out of the Union. Therefore, Reconstruction unnecessary. The president added that he did not intend to treat the former Confederate states as in cahoot or embryonic beings, but merely as existing under a temporary suspension of their government, provided always they elect loyal men. The doctrine of coercion to always to preserve a state in the Union had been vindicated by the people. It is the province of the executive to see that the will of the people is carried out and the rehabilitation of these rebellious states, once more under the authority as well as the protection of the Union. Along with Reconstruction, Andrew Johnson also thought that General Sherman's Special Field Order Number 15 was unnecessary. He gave in to the appeals from white people who used to own the land covered in the decree and revoked Sherman's order in October 1865. Most of all, those 400,000 acres on the Rice Coast would be returned to ex-Confederates. The grim task of evicting black people fell to the Freedmen's Bureau. About 40,000 people had done as General Saxton and Reverend French had urged during the meeting in a Savannah church back in February 1865. They had taken up hoes and spades and shovels. They had laid out gardens, raised chickens. They had ready grounds for corn, cotton, and other crops. They had worked so hard to build new lives and communities on Edisto Island, Tybee Island, Sapelo, Osbe, Skidaway, and so on. And now the government was pulling the rug out from under them, their property restored. One Freedmen's Bureau document alone listed 28 black families who had their land taken away and restored to a former rebel. These people lived at the Grove Point along Georgia's Little Okogie River. There, in the spring of 1865, Dinah Green, family of 3, for example, had been given the title for 15 acres. Ned Richardson, family of 9, 30, and Titus Neal, family of 2, 10. Dinah's, Ned's, and Titus's acres and those of their neighbors were restored to Dr. John R. Chives. During the war, his service to the Confederacy included supervising Charleston Harbor defenses and manufacturing incendiary shells. About 1,000 people were living in Tunis Campbell's 5-island fieldom. He had made St. Catherine's his base and established a government modeled on that of the United States. Campbell had schools up and running, and a militia too. Faced with the end of his Georgia Sea Island communities, Campbell did not abandon hope. He repurchased 1,250 acres of Belleville Plantation on the mainland, about 15 miles southwest of St. Catherine's. At Belleville, Campbell established a new black colony. Few black people facing eviction could do as Campbell did. Many of the Dinahs, Neds, and Tituses wound up working for the restored landowner for a pittance. Their hopes and dreams of being self-sufficient, of prospering, even crushed. It was also in the fall of winter 1865 that Southern governments began instituting black codes meant to limit the scope of freedom after slavery while jump-starting the region's agricultural economy by getting the freedmen to return to the fields. In essence, they were instruments of control. All persons of color who make contracts for service or labor shall be known as servants, and those with whom they contract shall be known as masters, declared a South Carolina law. To further keep black people economically oppressed, South Carolina allowed black people to be in business for themselves, say as an artisan or shopkeeper, on one condition. They had to procure licenses from the district court judges. These licenses, valid for only 1 year, forced artisans to pay $10, shopkeepers $100. At the time, a man in Nashville, Tennessee, for example, could buy a pair of boots for about $4. Black codes, which began in Mississippi, compelled black people to sign yearly labor contracts with white people, called for them to work from sunup to sundown and declared those without yearly contracts vagrants who would be forced to work. There were pass systems and curfews too, to keep black people from being able to defend themselves. Other black codes banned them from owning many types of weapons. In Mississippi, unless a black person was in the armed forces or had a license from the police board, it was a crime for him or her to keep or carry firearms of any kind or any ammunition, dirk or bow knife. People convicted of violating this law would be fined up to $10. Mississippi also made black-white marriages a felony, punishable by life in the penitentiary. In Florida, black offenders could be whipped. They could also be pilloried, that is, have their heads and hands locked into the holes of the wooden framework erected on the post and left on public display to be ridiculed and even physically attacked. Black children were not spared. Orphans could be placed into apprenticeships. Poor children who were not orphans could also be placed into apprenticeships, whether or not their parents wanted them bound out. Often the new masters of these children had once owned them. Once again, black families were torn asunder. But once again, black labor was stolen. Violence was another tool white people employed to keep blacks in their place. Black men and women, even children, were beaten up, shot, stabbed, bludgeoned, whipped, strung up for not working fast enough or failing to be sufficiently deferential to a white person. About the 4th of August, 1865, when Bill Murray beat the wife and daughter of Anthony Colored very severely with a stick because they were singing a Union song. This is from Freedmen's Bureau Agent John Sage report on white on black violence in Rutherford County, Tennessee. An agent in Texas reported that on November 21st, 1865, in Huntsville, a white man named Joseph Rhodes brutally attacked an elderly black man named Caleb Rhodes, kicked the old man into the fireplace, jumped on him, and tried to smash him into the fire, injuring him most severely. Wanton cruelty and whiskey. Black people weren't even safe in the capital. In the summer of 1865, a group of whites hurled a black woman from a moving trolley car that had been egged on by its conductor. Freedmen's Bureau files bulged with case after case after case of attacks on and murders of black Americans. As 1865 wound down, there was something to celebrate, however. On December 6, Georgia became the 27th of the 36 states to accept the 13th Amendment, ratified. It could now be adopted to the Constitution. Slavery was now legally abolished in the United States. Florida had yet to ratify the amendment abolishing slavery. Mississippi had flat out rejected it and would not ratify it until 1995. Then not make it official until 2013. And there was Texas. It had not yet held its state constitutional convention. Still, President Andrew Johnson declared the Union restored. Two days earlier, when Congress reconvened, it refused to seat the newly elected representatives and senators from the former Confederate states. The clerk of the House simply left their names off the roll call. This was Congress's first salvo in its war on presidential reconstruction. It was also on Wednesday, December 4th, 1865, that Congressman Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania proposed forming a committee of 6 senators and 9 representatives to look into conditions in the ex-Confederate states and determine which, if any, merited readmission into the Union. The revolutionary schemes of the majority in Congress are now fully developed. The Daily Milwaukee News told its readers on December 5th, 1865, this article titled Negro Government or Disunion is a stark reminder that it wasn't only in the South that some white people suffered from an irrational fear of black rule and vehemently opposed justice for all. The intention of the radicals, the Wisconsin newspaper went on to say, is to suppress all serious opposition to their measures by excluding the Southern representatives and then to pass an enabling act prescribing conditions for the reconstruction of the states recently in rebellion. The Joint Committee on Reconstruction that Thaddeus Stevens had proposed was a go on December 13. Its chair was Senator William Fessenden of Maine. Among the other senators were Ira Harris of New York and Reverdy Johnson of Maryland. One of the committee's three Democrats, Thaddeus Stevens, Elihu Washburn, Illinois, and George Bothwell, Massachusetts, were among the committee. House members, these men also known as the Joint Committee of 15, would hear testimony from 144 people, black and white, including former Confederate General Robert E. Lee, about the political, economic, and social situation, especially concerning black people in states that had risen up in rebellion. Is there no way to arrest the insane course of Andrew Johnson? That was Thaddeus Stevens in a letter to Senator Charles Sumner in the summer of 1865 on December 18th, 1865, on the floor of the House. Stevens once again decried President Johnson's policies and justified the action Congress had taken. Dead men cannot raise themselves. Dead states cannot restore their own existence as it was, he said. Congress and Congress alone, Stevens insisted, had the power to revive them. Stevens also argued that Congress was morally obligated to protect free people. If we leave them to the legislation of their late masters, we had better have left them in bondage. Chapter 5. African Americans did more than watch and wait. They organized, brimming with hope for the dawn of a new day. Alexandria, Virginia, Boston, Massachusetts, Charleston, South Carolina, Detroit, Michigan, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Little Rock, Arkansas, New Haven, Connecticut, Raleigh, North Carolina, Xenia, Ohio, East, West, North, South, all over the national black citizens held state and regional conventions to discuss the issues of the day and strategize on the way forward. They drafted addresses to the nation for the vote, for citizenship, for an end to the violence, for respect and recognition of their humanity. We are engaged in a serious task. We have met here to impress upon the white men of Tennessee, of the United States, and of the world that we are part and parcel of the American Republic. So said Reverend James Lynch at a convention in Nashville in August 1865. In pursuance of the great work thus begun, we are here to secure for ourselves the full recognition of our rights as men. During the war, this native of Baltimore, who had studied for the ministry at New Hampshire's Kimball Union Academy, engaged in missionary work in Union-occupied South Carolina and Georgia. Lynch was one of the ministers who met with General Sherman shortly before he issued his Special Field Order number 15. Especially in the rural South, there were also clandestine gatherings to disseminate information and to bolster people's courage to preserve. Many meetings were organized by the pro-Republican Union League during the Civil War. After the war ceased, the League expanded its number of operatives working in the South. Frederick Douglass, ever the lion, ever taking the nation to task for not living up to its creed, led a band of his brothers to the White House in the early February 1866. Surprisingly, President Johnson had granted them an audience. The men who accompanied Douglass included his son, Lewis, entrepreneur George T. Downing, one of Rhode Island's most prominent and wealthiest black residents, and educator John F. Cook, a member of Washington, D.C.'s black aristocracy. The delegation went to the White House to urge the president to get behind black suffrage and urging Johnson to support black men having the ballot with which to save ourselves. Frederick Douglass reminded him that Lincoln had given black men the sword to assist in saving the nation. The president countered that if black men secured the vote, there would be violence in the South. Yes, I have said, and I repeat here, he stated that if the colored man in the United States could find no other Moses or any Moses that would be more able and efficient than myself, I would be his Moses to lead him from bondage to freedom, and that I would pass him from a land where he had lived in slavery to a land, if it were to our reach, of freedom. Yes, I would be willing to pass with him through the Red Sea to land of promise, to the land of liberty, but I am not willing, under either circumstance, to adopt a policy which I believe will only result in the sacrifice of his life and the shedding of his blood. While black people were organizing, protesting, petitioning, Congress served up the Civil Rights Act of 1866, a counterpunch to black codes. With the exceptions of Native Americans living on reservations, people born on American soil were deemed citizens of the nation. What's more, the federal government was duty-bound to protect the property and the lives of all its citizens. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act over Johnson's veto on April 9, 1866, a year to the day of Lee's surrender to Grant. 10 months after the Civil Rights Act, on June 13, 1866, something even more momentous cleared Congress, the 14th Amendment. Through it, Republicans endeavored to embed citizenship directly into the Constitution, 9 years after the U.S. Supreme Court said its Dred Scott decision that black people never were and never would be U.S. citizens. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside, said the 14th Amendment. It also declared that states could not deprive citizens of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, or deny them the equal protection of the laws. Furthermore, the 14th Amendment pressured states to give black men the vote by giving Congress the power to reduce a state's representation if the state denied the vote to any segment of its male population, age 21 and older. The amendment also put a check on aspirations of former Confederate leaders. Unless approved by 2/3 of the House and Senate, they could hold no military, civilian, or elected office. Congress had the option of removing the ban, which it did in 1898. Also, vexing for the former Confederate states, the 14th Amendment prohibited the federal government or any state from absorbing debts racked up in the aid of the rebellion or losses incurred with the liberation of black people. White violence was a factor in the 14th Amendment clearing Congress. The previous month, on May 1st, 1866, white people went on killing spree in Memphis, Tennessee. Approximately 46 black adults and children and 2 white people were killed. More than 70 people were wounded. Nearly 100 black homes were torched. 12 black schools were burned. Several black churches were left in ashes. Large sums of black people's money were taken by police and others, wrote the Freedmen's Bureau Major T.W. Gilbreth to his boss, General Oliver O. Howard. The thefts ranged from $5 to $500, the latter being quite frequent owing to the fact that many of the colored men had just paid off and were paid off and discharged from the army. The 36-hour assault on the black settlements in Memphis came on the heels of an altercation between Irish policemen and black soldiers. A rumor spread that black troops had killed white police officers. In response, the city recorder, John C. Creighton, took to his soapbox on the corner of Causey and Vance Street. Creighton reported Gilbreth urged the whites to arm themselves and kill every Negro and drive the last one from the city. Creighton even prodded white people to burn up the cradle. A multitude of black people remained strong in the face of the violence. Union Army veterans Wyatt Outlaw was among the steadfast souls. In October 1866, he was one of the 115 delegates at the 4-day North Carolina Equal Rights League Convention of the Freedmen. Raleigh's African American Methodist Episcopal Church was the venue for the gathering of black men representing 60 Tar Heel counties. Wyatt Outlaw was on the executive board of this Equal Rights League, determined to secure by political or moral means, as far as may be, the repeal of all laws and parts of laws, state and national, that make distinctions on account of color. After the convention, Outlaw formed a chapter of the Union League in his adopted home of Graham, along with mobilizing folks for political action. This chapter made plans to build a school and a church. Outlaw organized Graham's Union League in his home on North Main Street, which was also the site of his carpentry shop. Like many other black men and women in their respective communities, Wyatt Outlaw continued to be a positive force in Graham for years to come. All right, we'll start part 3 next time.